So let me go on now back to the kind of comparative democracy issue and just remind you, I think most of you, how many of you have heard this term before, the Human Development Index? Okay, good. So the reason why we like it is that it's not just looking at per capita income, it's looking at the two other measures as well, life expectancy at birth and education. And to get a measure of education, it's averaging two measures: the mean years of schooling of adults over 25, and a technical measure that the UNDP has developed, the expected years of schooling for a child of school age, depending on what the newest trends are in terms of how long kids in that country are staying in school. And so you get these three measures, they standardize each, and then they average them into a score of 0 to 1. One of the things that's been happening, by the way, because I've been tracking this data for a long time, is that more and more countries have been moving out of the low human development category into medium, out of medium into high, and out of high into very high. One of the things I've noticed is that there are more and more countries now that have very high human development. This is another way of saying, because a lot of what we've been looking at is worrisome, negative trends, a lot of international distress, and I will tell you, you knew it before I said it, the problem of inequality is not getting better in the world, it's not getting better in the United States, and it's not getting better in the world. We have a severe trend now globally. I think it's part of what is driving the populist backlash in the United States and the West. As a result of globalization, as a result of increasing returns to knowledge in the workplace, or the technological revolution and so on, of severely and broadly increasing inequality almost everywhere in the world. So given all these negative trends for freedom and human human justice in terms of equality and so on, I do want to note that generally in the world, life expectancy is increasing. Infant mortality and child mortality are steadily declining. More and more children are getting vaccinated and living longer for that reason alone. Educational levels are rising. Particularly, there's a separate measure that the World Bank and the UNDP look at that just is what percentage of school-age girls are being educated. And by the way, there are very few things that will give you more leverage on where a country is headed than the percentage of girls that are, say, getting a secondary school education. So these trends are all generally, continually, steadily, incrementally getting better. We're therefore saying, if you're wondering where the world is headed overall, a mixed picture in which there is some general improvement in human development over time. But one of the things you see is that oil countries are not as developed, I'm going to show you this, as they appear, okay? In money income, they look rich. But if you look at their Human Development Index, they're not as developed as they look in terms of their money income. And of course, there's an obvious answer for that, right? What is it? Someone speak up.
Economic inequality.
Okay. And that means what in terms of the UN Human Development Index?
Although the countries are gaining a lot of money, this money is only going to a very small percentage. And as a result, as a whole, the entirety of their societies are not benefiting from it. So all of society is not seeing these increased lifespans.
Okay.
Just a question. How do Human Development Index numbers for, like, say, I'm just thinking of a classic small Gulf state with a large population of workers brought in to do a lot of the jobs. Do they count for those numbers, or is it just citizens?
I think they are only looking at citizens. And you have just raised one of the most massive social justice questions you could raise about these countries. Did everyone hear the question? What about migrant workers in low population, oil-rich states? So Saudi Arabia now has 25 million people, but what about Qatar or United Arab Emirates or something like that? There are more foreigners living in Qatar than there are residents. And Qatar could not have and would not have the highest per capita income in the world. It's over $100,000. If you, I think if you divided it by all the residents and not just citizens. But I'll check just to make sure. You had a question?
I also think it's a little bit dependent on the religion side, especially when it comes to the UNDP and education. Because if you look at women's education in Muslim countries, it is lower.
Lower, yes, of course.
It is about
And
economic
so
development also, but
we've got another problem here, that in many of these countries, the oil-rich countries of the Gulf are all Muslim countries. They have more conservative attitudes about education for women. I do think it's changing, and that is one of the reasons why these countries are moving up, not only in per capita income, but in human development as well. But there still is this, yes, inequality in access to education, and of course, much more severe inequality when you're done with education and then you're talking about the workplace. You had a question or comment?
No, I mean, it was just going to be directly connecting inequality to, it generally means that their universal system of education is going to be limited, so the mean years of schooling of adults over 25, so it's going to be low.
Okay, so let's keep going on, just kind of quickly get through this data here. So we can look at the Human Development Index, or we can look at per capita income. Of the top 25 countries in the Human Development Index, as I said, only Singapore is not a democracy. Of the top 25 countries in per capita income, there are a lot of non-democracies now because these oil countries are so incredibly wealthy. Now you see the difference, okay? This is very stunning. You can look at, Equatorial Guinea, which is a country that looks, $19,000 in per capita income per year for this tiny country, but it's actually one of the least developed countries in the world in terms of education, life expectancy, and so on. And of course, the reason why is that it has a kleptocratic ruler. If you want to know more, just Google Equatorial Guinea and its tyrant, Obiang. So if you look at its rank on per capita income, actually it used to be much higher. It's now 64, but there's a massive difference of 77 places in its rank on human development versus its rank on per capita income. And if you go through the oil-rich countries of the Gulf, you see the exact same pattern that, well, Brunei's not in the Gulf, it's in Southeast Asia, but it follows the same pattern. Qatar, Saudi Arabia, United Emirates, huge difference between their rank on per capita income, which is now kind of top 10, top 15, and their rank on human development, which has, by the way, improved dramatically. And as these countries keep getting richer and richer, it would, because per capita income and purchasing power parity dollars is a component of the Human Development Index. But when you look at the democracies, it's the reverse, partly because of this. The kind of, a few selected democracies in different parts of the world, their rank on human development is higher than their just kind of nominal rank on per capita income. Now, is there something else you notice here?
The US.
Yes. What do you see?
It's the only democracy on this chart that ranks lower in the Human Development Index than it does in gross.
Okay,
gross
why do you think that is? I mean, what could explain it? Yeah?
Just our terrible income inequality.
Yeah? It's this is one sign of deteriorating income inequality. And I will say this was not the case a few years ago. I was actually surprised to see this. Not shocked when I thought about it for the reason you said, but it's one indication that, first of all, we've been making a lot in recent years of the fact that life expectancy has been stagnating or declining in Russia. It's now starting to do that in the United States as well. And that is another sign. It's partly the opioid crisis. It's partly the crisis of the displacement of the working class in the United States. It's partly a reflection of the state of our healthcare system and health insurance. But in any case, it's telling us something about American democracy beyond some of the concerning things about political polarization, political dysfunction, and so on. Anyway, you might want to study this. Now, if anybody is motivated to do it, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to say do it on your exam, but if anybody loves data and is just curious, you can, the UNDP unpacks its scores for the 3 indicators of income, education, and life expectancy. So you could throw out the income measure here and compute a new score just based on education and life expectancy. And of course, you'd see a much bigger gap in these Gulf income countries. Okay? So our income has overall gone up, okay? Because per capita income says nothing about distribution. It's just overall level of income from purchasing power parity dollars divided by the number of people. So obviously what this is saying is that in relative terms, the US is falling behind in either education or life expectancy, and I just told you we are falling behind in life expectancy.
Why in the recent years?
Why is that happening? Well, there's a whole debate about why life expectancy is declining in the United States. But if I'm recalling what I've read in the newspapers, it is, for example, one group where it's stalling is kind of white males in their 50s, 60s. The death rate is kind of rising. I think the opioid crisis is one reason, and just generally, economic insecurity of a certain segment of American society, things like that. I mean, there's a whole field of social and economic research that is now kind of intensively looking at this question. What we know is the outcome, that life expectancy overall is not improving in the United States on a continuing basis the way it is in many of our peer democracies, and so the US is falling behind. And that's a flashing red light of something being wrong with our social and economic system.